It's a politically sensitive year for China.
Local police have blamed it on a criminal gang.
This is much bigger than that.
On Sunday, July 12th, over 1,000 Chinese citizens gathered at a bank in the Chinese city of Zhengzhou, all for the same reason. Their life savings had magically disappeared 3 months ago. Hard-earned money that they deposited into their bank account, poof, gone, with zero explanation from their bank. And these were not the bank accounts of rich Chinese citizens, by the way. This was money they relied on to pay for food, rent, medicine. Their online access had been revoked, they couldn't use ATMs, they couldn't make transfers, they couldn't even check their account balance, nothing. In total, around $6 billion disappeared into thin air, with 6 Chinese banks freezing their customers' accounts without notice. And now these protesters were getting desperate. With no other options, the protesters forced their way onto the bank stairs, demanding their money back from the bank employees. It was a bank run, and that is when it happened. It looked like a scene straight out of a dystopian nightmare. Hundreds of unmarked security forces dressed in plain white shirts appeared out of nowhere, and they proceeded to show the protesters no mercy. Protesters were beaten, kicked to the ground, dragged away. It didn't matter if the protesters were women, children, the elderly. It didn't matter if they were disabled or pregnant. They were treated all the same. One pregnant woman was even dragged by her hair and shoved onto a bus, and when her stomach started aching and she begged to be taken to a hospital, the men refused. And all of this was just because these disobedient subjects wanted their money back. My name is Jake Tran, and we make documentaries on money, power, war, and crime so that you can see the world for what it really is. A giant game of acquiring power. You can't get out of this game either way, so instead of being a victim, why not learn to be a better player? Your parents, teachers, friends, society will never teach you any of this, so we're going to. And these are the bank runs in China. As you all know, prices for everything are out of control lately, which means it's never been more important to save as much money as you can. And one great way to save money is by canceling subscriptions you no longer use. The problem is that I have so many subscriptions that a lot of the time I'll just forget to cancel them and I'll end up wasting money for another month on something I don't even use anymore. But thankfully, there's actually this app that makes canceling subscriptions way easier. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. Rocket Money is everything I loved about Truebill with a fresh new look. If you don't know, Rocket Money is an incredible all-in-one personal finance platform that has saved me and 3.4 million other members almost $250 million and counting. And one of their coolest features is helping you cancel unwanted subscriptions with just one click. All you have to do is securely connect your accounts, Rocket Money will then list out all your active subscriptions, and then you can cancel the ones you don't use anymore right within the app. My other favorite feature of theirs is even better, where Rocket Money will actually negotiate down your bills for you. All you have to do is select the bill you want lowered, take a photo of the bill or enter the information manually, and Rocket Money will get busy negotiating your bill down for you. They've got an 85% success rate, and if they're successful, you get to choose how much of those savings you want to pass on to Rocket Money for their help. But that is just the beginning. There are a ton of other useful features on Rocket Money, so if you want to save money, you need to start using it as soon as possible. So to try it out for free and unlock more features with Premium, head to rocketmoney.com/Jake with the link below. That's rocketmoney.com/Jake with the link below so they know I sent you. Thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video.
China has around 1,600 village banks. Basically, village banks are small financial institutions that are supposed to be used by farmers, village workers, and people who don't need much more than a place to store their money. But over the years, village banks have become more and more popular because of one thing: their interest rates. You see, where the Bank of China only offers 2.75% a year in interest, most of these smaller banks offer nearly double that at around 4.5% a year. That means if someone deposited their life savings of $100,000 with the Bank of China, they would earn around $2,750 a year in interest. But if they deposited that same amount with a village bank, they would be earning $4,500 instead. That doesn't seem like much, but if all it took to nearly double your interest on your money was to move your money to another bank, it's easy to see why these village banks became popular very quickly. There was just one problem. Opening a bank account in a bank outside of your home city or province in China is illegal. Yep, in China, you're technically not allowed to deposit your money with a bank outside of your home base. But since these small village banks were offering such great interest rates, many Chinese people from across the country just couldn't help but disobey the government. So, They started using third-party apps to deposit their money in these banks, even though they lived thousands of miles away. And for years, everything went perfectly fine. Their accounts earned interest, they could easily withdraw their money, and even transfer it around the country, exactly like the app developers promised. But then on one fateful day in April 2022, their access to their bank accounts disappeared. They were completely shut out. Some people had put their life savings into these accounts just to find that they had no way to use any of it. They couldn't withdraw money, they couldn't transfer it. It was as if any trace of their money had just disappeared. From there, panic ensued. People were sending emails, calling the bank's service lines, but no one got any replies. The only explanation anyone offered was that an internal network update had blocked outside access to bank accounts. But as the days turned into weeks, people started getting desperate. This wasn't just a couple of $1,000s that got lost. It was $6 billion. It was insane. So people started to get desperate, fast. The people affected borrowed and scraped together what little cash they could do to travel all the way to the headquarters of these banks to demand their money back. If they could go to these banks in person and talk to the managers themselves, then maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to get some answers. But these disobedient citizens failed to remember the lessons from Tiananmen Square. They failed to remember the lessons from the COVID lockdowns. They failed to remember that the Chinese government will do anything necessary to keep law and order. In May, the headquarters of a village bank in Chenzhou woke up to a surprise. Thousands of angry customers were waiting to get into the building and find out where their money had gone. The same thing happened at all the other 5 banks that had frozen accounts too. But no matter how much the people pleaded to be let in, to be given real answers, the bank employees refused, and the doors to the banks stayed shut. Tensions were rising, and if the local government officials didn't want a full-blown uprising on their hands, they were gonna have to think fast. Luckily, they had a perfect solution. When the COVID outbreak started in China, citizens were told to sign up for an app that would track their COVID status and whether or not they had been in contact with anyone who tested positive. It uses a color code to indicate your COVID-19 risk. If your profile is green, you have not been exposed to anyone with COVID and are safe to travel and work. But if your code is yellow or red, you have been in contact with someone that had COVID. So say goodbye to your ability to shop, use public transport, or go to work. As with any government program from any government, they proclaimed that,
"Oh, COVID contact tracing is for your safety. It's for the public good, of course. Nothing more. We're not going to use it to control you in the future."
But when these bank runs started happening, they thought,
Well, we can't have an uprising on our hands, now can we? We need to keep the peace.
so they changed everyone's COVID status to red. That way, none of them would be able to travel or gather to protest. Very efficient, right? And their plan worked perfectly. Just as all the bank customers were planning on meeting up at their banks to protest, their health codes suddenly turned red. They were stranded, they couldn't use public transport, and they were forced to stay inside their homes or hotels, even though they knew it was all just a ploy to keep them from demanding their money back. One man was held by police in a library for over 12 hours because his code had turned red on his way to the bank. Coincidentally, when he was escorted to the airport to be sent back home, his code suddenly turned green again. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for protesters to figure out what was going on. And when the news started reporting how government officials had faked thousands of COVID health alerts, the CCP had no choice but to punish the local government officials responsible. Encouraged by the CCP's apparent support of the protesters gathered at the banks again, completely oblivious that the local government officials weren't the only ones who were going to get punished. Except this time, things turned violent. See, in China, it's common for police in China to be at sensitive events undercover, with no uniforms or markings. For example, at previous legal proceedings for Chinese human rights lawyers, quote, "Foreign journalists and diplomats who gather outside the courthouse have occasionally been shoved by unidentified individuals wearing identical yellow smiley face badges," end quote. It's honestly a genius tactic if you're the government. Intimidate and scare your enemies into silence without them being able to prove that it was you. So the Chinese government decided to use that same tactic here, except this time, it was turned up a notch. That's when a group of uniformed police officers appeared, but they weren't alone. They were joined by a much larger group of unmarked men, mostly wearing white tops, and the strategy was simple. the uniformed police officer stood by as the white shirts began mercilessly attacking the crowd. People were beaten, then dragged down the stairs of the bank, then dragged onto buses to be taken away from the protest. The government thought that this show of force would make their subjects think twice about protesting, but as footage spread all over Chinese social media, more people started traveling to the banks to protest. Something would have to be done to prevent a full-blown crisis. With chaos in the streets, the government finally offered some explanation of what was going on. According to them, 4 of the 6 banks that had frozen their clients' accounts were controlled by the Hunan New Fortune Group. The company is owned by a guy named Lu Yi, the head of a powerful criminal gang. Apparently, the Hunan New Fortune Group had gone out of its way to market its banks insane investment programs and interest rates all over the country. As a result, more and more people started opening accounts and investing with these banks through third-party apps. And with all that money pouring in, it was easy for a guy like Lu Yi to arrange for massive loans to be given to him and his colleagues from that money, loans he never planned on repaying. But here's the kicker. According to the investigators, Lu Yi and his team had been running the scheme for over 10 years, more than a decade, and no one had ever realized. According to the government, Lu Yi was now a wanted man and would only be a matter of time until justice is served. But for the people who need their money to survive, life isn't looking all that optimistic. It could take months, more if not years, for the government to figure out who exactly was behind the disappearing money. And even then, that doesn't guarantee they'll actually be able to recover any of the stolen cash. Until then, thousands of Chinese citizens still don't have access to any of their money. The problem is, this is the CCP we're talking about here, and there are a lot of other financial problems ready to explode in China. So who knows if this criminal gang takeover story is actually true? The CCP recently announced a payback scheme that will return everyone's money as long as they had deposited less than 150,000 yen, or $22,000, into their accounts. The problem is, most of these depositors had much more than that in their accounts. They put their life savings in there, and now they're left without any idea if they'll ever see a cent of their money again. Most of the people still protesting are holding on to the hope that the CCP will intervene. But even they have to admit that cheating people out of answers, beating them up, and then offering them chump change in exchange for years of hard work and sacrifice has shaken their faith in the party and its leader. And with the twice-a-decade National Congress that will decide if President Xi Jinping stays president happening later this year, this loss of faith means a lot of heads will have to roll if President Xi Jinping plans on keeping his throne and restoring the CCP's good name. The CCP has never shied away from going to extreme lengths to keep their populace docile and obedient, but they're not the only ones. The American government is just as good at hiding the things they do in the name of the greater good. And nothing is a better example of that than the CIA's Black Site program. For almost 10 years after 9/11, the CIA kidnapped hundreds of Arabic suspects using so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, wink wink. And these interrogation techniques were brutal. It didn't matter that most of those men and women were innocent. They were all questioned the same. Honestly, the stuff the CIA did to its prisoners was horrifying, and it's some of the darkest stuff we've ever covered on this channel. But a public video about all the creative ways the CIA found to break its prisoners is pretty much guaranteed to get instantly demonetized by YouTube. Which is why we've decided to release it as a full-length private documentary that's only available to channel members. And all you have to do to get access to this documentary right now is hit that join button below. Once you do, you'll have unlimited access to our CIA Black Sites video, as well as other documentaries on topics like MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, Jeffrey Epstein, and the roots of Middle Eastern terror. People willingly give universities tens of thousands of dollars without them ever teaching you about how the world really works. But when you become a member, you'll get access to all this insider info for only $5 a month. Plus, there's a refund policy too, unlike most YouTube memberships. So if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within your first month of joining and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund.
Modern day bank runs. We haven't seen bank runs in America since like the 1920s, so it's super fascinating to see it happen in the 21st century. So let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you're new here, this is one of the biggest channels on YouTube for documentaries on money, power, war, and crime. So if you enjoyed this one, click that subscribe button below because we make multiple videos just like this one every single week and you have nothing to lose. You can follow me on Instagram at JakeChan for a chance to win $1,000, but that's gonna wrap it up. Stay dangerous out there and I will see you guys in the next one.